What's going on? My name is Michael and welcome to Fudge Muppet. If you've been watching the channel for the last couple of months, then you'd know we've spent plenty of time enjoying Starfield. But as we've mentioned in some of our longer discussions about it on the channel, there are some flaws that we'd want Bethesda to address. And this is that video we've said is coming that talks about the main areas that need addressing. Starfield has given us hundreds of hours of joy, so we definitely don't share the sentiment of those who have disliked the game from day one. We've enjoyed playing through all the main factions, testing out different builds, discovering the coolest planets and aliens in the galaxy, doing every side quest possible, and of course building some very exotic ships perfect for different role-playing experiences. This video won't be talking about things like making the game more of a space flight simulator or that there's too many loading screens or anything of that nature. Sure, less loading screens and the ability to fly down onto the surface of a planet manually would be cool, it's just not the kind of thing we'd give significant weight to in comparison to other changes or fixes we'd want. So if you hated Starfield and it just wasn't for you, we'll be coming at this from a different place. It's also worth noting that this video is mostly constrained within the realm of what we think Bethesda would be able and willing to do. We're not rewriting the game from scratch here. Maybe we could make an ideal Starfield video that does that, but this is the kind of video we actually really want Bethesda to watch and listen to. We believe everything we ask for in this video is completely feasible for them to do, so please do share it as much as you can to get their attention, and leave your comments below voicing the fixes you think would be very helpful for those of us who have enjoyed the game but still see areas for improvement. As much as I love mods, if Bethesda truly is committed to making this a game people play for a decade, then they need to bring a lot to the table. There's a lot to unpack here, and as always you can expect many additional ideas loaded into each topic. The first thing and chunkiest thing on this list is fixing skills, which ultimately impact the builds people can make, how it feels to play them, and whether it's worth making particular types of characters. Here at Fudge Muppet, we are very enthusiastic about builds and role-playing characters, and having tried many different playstyles, it is clear that some are vastly underpowered, and in some cases, like unarmed, simply unenjoyable for most players. I won't cover every single skill we'd want to enhance because some tweaks are tiny, but let's just talk about some main ones. So unarmed has 3 skills related to it, yet still ends up very underpowered and a very tough grind if you plan to max out the ranks of skills like neuro strikes, which you'd hope make you into some kind of god tier brawler, but don't. And just to address real quickly any sort of that makes sense because a fist can't punch through a spacesuit kind of stuff, look, if we're playing a realistic game, then no enemy should be able to eat 10 headshots either. Let's be real, realism doesn't always equal fun. All games pick and choose realism trade-offs to create a balance of immersion and fun. I'd understand if there were no related skills like in Skyrim, so unarmed clearly wasn't a focus area, then fine, but if you're going to have 3 unarmed related skills, implying that I can have a great time with an unarmed character, it should be feasible and enjoyable. I think that the damage bonuses from the boxing skill should be at least doubled. In my opinion, every build should feel satisfyingly powerful at its end. This is a big philosophy we believe in here at Fudge Muppet, and we want to see it implemented. For example, in Skyrim, you can be a powerful mage, a powerful assassin, or a powerful warrior, or mixes between different styles, and yes, there are always certain builds that may, in the long term, scale far better. For example, weapon damage ends up more powerful than destruction magic. However, all of the playstyles still feel powerful enough in their final forms for your playthrough during a single player game. New animation cycles should also be added to unarmed to make the progression feel cooler and more effective instead of this weird lock at the end of the current 3-punch animation cycle being there no matter what. Melee needs attention too. If you've watched our operative build, then you'd know a fun melee playthrough is possible, particularly by pumping chems for speed and more damage, but it still doesn't stack up anywhere near as well as using guns does in the late game. Now, I don't mind if guns end up better stats wise no matter what, however, melee is just too outclassed by it, and Bethesda needs to add in scaled versions of melee weapons like guns have in the form of advanced, calibrated, and so on. Even though we want to see more melee weapons added in DLC. BGS doesn't even need to make a new asset here necessarily to fix the imbalance. Just grab the same Wakizashi, for example, make it advanced, and add more base damage like you do for guns. It would also be cool to add swing speed boosts with increasing ranks of the dueling skill. Speaking of adding new weapons, a few more particle beam weapons and laser weapons would also be appreciated. And look, if we do get a House for Rune based DLC, then that could be the perfect time to add some. I also think adding finishers would be great for melee and unarmed. They were in Skyrim and Fallout's not necessarily a melee predominant game, so they should definitely be in Starfield to increase the satisfaction of playing melee and unarmed, especially once they're rebalanced properly. Now, I feel old saying this, but those of us who got Skyrim upon its release in 2011 would remember that ranged finishers like those done with arrows or with magic weren't actually a thing until later updates, nor was mounted combat. You couldn't even attack while riding a horse, and I think there's probably a lot of this kind of stuff that we'll look back on in the future and forget it wasn't even in Starfield on launch day. Now don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that it not being there is fine. It should have been there from day one, but surely they'll add stuff like this like they've done before. Now stealth is another area that needs some rebalancing, and in my video all about stealth, some people were saying it's so broken, I can't be stealthy at all, but others were saying it's finally good that it's not super OP like it was in Skyrim, and that we absolutely shouldn't change anything. However, what I would say is that it should be serviceable to play a stealth melee build, and it just kinda isn't, particularly indoors. Now, I also think that if you're bothered to go through the massive grind of getting all the ranks of concealment, maybe you should feel like a ridiculously powerful stealth character, with a realistic or challenging stealth feel still available for characters who only get the stealth skill, but don't spec into concealment. Or if you really think stealth is in such a great sweet spot apart from melee, then maybe holding a melee weapon makes you much stealthier compared to holding a gun, even with rank 2 of concealment, which really, when you test it, seems to remove carry weight penalty, so it doesn't really matter what kind of weapon you're carrying. But if just holding a knife or a sword made you much harder to detect while sneaking around, I think it would make the build much more viable. And look, maybe some guns characters would exploit that by holding a melee weapon while going around in sneak and then just switching to guns, but look, I'd rather that be an option than melee stealth just not be viable at all. Perhaps you actually need the dueling skill for melee to get the stealth bonus too, to prevent that. You can tell me what you think of that in the comments, but as for the rest of the skills, another thing that needs to be fixed is the fact that some of them aren't really working properly or enough to be worth choosing even for role-playing. The deception skill is a great example. This is supposed to make ships yield to your piracy demands, but it seems to be completely bugged and not working as intended. Food is also not that powerful, even though there's a chef background and 2 skills related to food, gastronomy and nutrition, so food should be buffed so that if you put the points into such a build, you actually feel like it's worth it to pick up, use, and craft food. It goes back to what I was saying before. If you do dump into a certain playstyle area, you really want to feel like there's this cool payoff every time. Destruction is weaker than weapons in Skyrim, but you can still feel like a beast as a destruction mage and like your choice was worth it. But you don't feel that cool and like it was worth getting food perks in Starfield. Now, I'm not just saying let anyone make any build and let that build be super great. You can make bad builds if you make bad choices, but actual skills themselves shouldn't be underwhelming. Opportunity cost is incredibly relevant when it comes to building characters. It's your time in game, and while some playstyles and skill choices will always be better than others, we want players to feel like they can get a fun reward for creating all kinds of unique character types. I think each new rank of a skill should feel like an improvement too, in some tangible way, related to the core of what the skill is. So as a bit of a nitpick example, I think the gymnastics skill should increase jump height gradually at every rank, because 0G is rare, so ranks 2 and 3, they kind of just feel like stepping stones to get rank 4. Many of the physical skills in general related to making your character harder to kill should be buffed to provide that feeling of being a tank, especially if players are bothered to dive into it and put their precious skill points into the various resistance-based options. Don't get me wrong, there's plenty of Starfield skills that do what we want the right way, like boost assault training, which adds new effects at each rank and ends up being super cool and progressively makes you feel like a jetpack assault trooper. There's plenty to praise about Starfield and lots of cool skill stuff, but as you'd know, this isn't a praise video. Now, in the same vein as boost assault training, the physical tree resistance skills should make you feel like you are this hardy tank that can kind of just tough your way out of any situation. Like if you're caught with your pants down on an alien planet, you can just manage to survive where others could not. I'd rather be able to invest into a character that feels more powerful over time, but then just continue to find greater challenges. So if I manage to create a giant battleship that might be OP in some ways, especially because I'm some kind of admiral character with a big ship crew situation going on, then I should be able to fight 2 enemy battleships that are massive, like the legendary ships you can find, and I can pull off the win. You can always scale challenges along with a player who is gradually feeling more powerful in their area of specialization. And to be fair, some areas of Starfield do scale perfectly. It's just some areas that are weirdly underpowered or feel like an afterthought from a statistical perspective that just leave me scratching my head. In the social tree, there's the deception skill we talked about, but other skills that do work correctly could still be enhanced or even have side effects added at ranks to make them cooler. Commerce, for example, could give you the option to sell any type of item to anyone or give vendors additional credits to make selling easier. The thief experience could be enhanced a bit too. There's some cool quest uses for pickpocketing, but at later levels, when enemies have higher tier weapons like advanced and so on, the chance to steal them's too low for the skill points invested. If I'm a master thief, I should feel pretty sure that most likely I'm going to steal an enemy's gun, no matter how valuable it is. The dialogue skills like intimidation and manipulation and so on are great to use for speech checks, and all the dialogue checks in the game is something we really love. However, it does feel like these specific social skills can be a bit clunky in their combat use when you use the scanner, particularly if you have a whole list of them to scan through with no weapon drawn. Perhaps a smoother way to do this could be slowing time as you hover over your targets and making it a bit more like the quick hacking function in Cyberpunk. But that's just a smoothness thing. Ship command is a big one, which I've talked about in a previous video. I'll link that in the description, but basically the use case just isn't good enough because ship crew skills don't stack. Functionally, this skill allows you to have 8 companions assigned as crew, with Sarah Morgan as a 9th because her crew skill, leadership, gives an extra slot, essentially cancelling her out. However, outside of cool admiral character vibes, the use case here is limited until crew skills stack. With the current setup, it just doesn't feel worth it to spend the credits needed to hire a missile system specialist or what have you to get a small boost to weapon recharge time, for example, and not be able to hire more to keep stacking it. So if it was cumulative and you had some big armament ship stacked with ballistic weaponry and you hire a crew that is spec to that, so several ballistic weapon system specialists, all of which stack, then maybe you get to something like a 50% total boost, and this can drastically affect your DPS due to reduced recharge times. I could understand stacking some other skills like piloting based on the current magnitude could create some crazy game-breaking boosts, but then again, I don't know, maybe that could be fun if you spec'd everything and everyone so that you end up a speed freak. Other ways they could do this is to make some skills stack and others not, or just none stack but instead buff all the weapon systems crew skill bonuses and make them worthwhile. More services-based roles should exist too, so if I hire a doctor, they should function as a doctor vendor providing medical services. But let's finish up skills. These are all light critiques by comparison, but explosives could scale better and be stronger. Rapid reloading affecting weapons by type feels a little odd to me. I feel as if there should be a more engaging way to structure this skill, things more akin to the final rank, the idea being benefits that reward firing and reloading fast, like stacking over and over to become the fastest gunslinger. Again, it's one of those things I feel like should incrementally increase, like for our gunslinger character using Razorback revolvers. It did feel weird to essentially take 2 ranks of a skill, which gave me little to no benefit, in order to access the 4th rank. EM weapons themselves can be OP if used well, however, it would be cool if their use in quests was taken into account a bit more. This would optimize things for pacifist build playthroughs, so if you're instructed to take down 10 pirates in the room, then using EM weapons could be completely valid. Being able to take back pacified bounty targets would also be cool. I want to avoid getting too nitpicky, but I was also a little let down by spacesuit design. The bonuses for the most part didn't feel substantial enough for the investment required, and sure, there is the convenience of being able to change boost pack types in the case where you find legendaries with basic or skip pack or something and you want balanced, And look, science is a good tree if you're going that way, but the opportunity cost still gets pretty wild. I'll have a video with more on that in the description as well. And these mods should be made to physically change the armor in some way, the same way that the appearance of guns change when you mod them. Basically, I want Bethesda to fix any broken skills, buff the lackluster ones, add some new weapon variants, especially for melee, and by extension, improve their playstyle possibilities. The second biggest thing I think that needs some work is enhancing exploration and radiant aspects of the world. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm the first person to admit that I had a lot of fun in Starfield, especially within the first 100, even 200 hours when it came to finding things and discovering new locations. But now the way that Starfield's location generation works is much clearer. All the random points of interest are not randomized and changed internally, but rather just set pieces plonked onto the map. There's actually a lot of variety if you go looking for it. It does seem like the same type of mission board tasks can send you to similar locations, but I didn't run into a repeat location even once until I was well over the 100-hour mark. However, other people ran into repeat places much sooner, and I can understand that for them it changed the vibe a lot. In an ideal world, perhaps there was a more in-depth generation system that makes locations indistinguishable to a degree by mashing different modules together, but that clearly isn't the case. Now, I'd also just like to add here that I think with all the DLC Bethesda seems like they're planning to do, we can just expect that there's going to be more handcrafted places added to the world over time. So what I want to actually talk about are the random points of interest for now, because I think that those would be the most easy to overlook while making new content for DLC and just kind of left in the past, and I think that would be a mistake. One thing I think would make a massive difference is enhancement by sheer volume. I'm not saying to drop the quality, and I don't know the exact number of random locations so far, but imagine if there was just 50 new ones added over time, or all at once in a DLC. Now, it doesn't have to be 50, but you can imagine that adding a bunch of new locations, say doubling the existing number of dungeons when mixed alongside other gameplay like quests and factions, really would make it much harder to come across the same place twice. Also, I'm not sure how they calculate what shows up and when, but they could implement a system where the next location you find is just not able to be one of the last 20 random locations you've seen. Something like that, because after 300 hours, there's some locations I've seen multiple times, but even after all this time, sometimes I'll stumble across a place like maybe a type of industrial outpost or something like that, or even an enemy location that I've just never seen, which is just so cool to think that that's possible. However, I do think that those locations should have taken the place of a previous location, which I've already seen before, if the game kind of had an awareness of what I've already stumbled across. In the same way, adding in new natural features, just a whole bunch of cool ones to discover in different ecosystems, would also be welcome. Anyway, Starfield is not going to be a game where everything is handcrafted in set locations only, so I think that Bethesda can and should just volume max their way into a much better experience for long-term players by making a large amount of new high-quality handcrafted points of interest for us to be able to find. Another great idea, which would be easier but not as cool, would be creating slightly different versions of the same location. So you get the same abandoned research tower perhaps, but make 4 types of it. I was listening to part of one of Zarek's videos the other night, and he was recommending an easy way of doing this by having different texture types and different lighting types. So for one location, there's an option between if everything's smooth and new looking, or rusty and worn down, and then another option of if the lighting is perfect or if it's kind of flickering and malfunctioning, and then you could just move the furniture around a bit and enemy locations and loot, and you'd be able to mash these options together to create a lot of variety without that much effort. A little does go a long way, and perhaps this is just the easy way out that Bethesda should take, but I'd still prefer to see something like that mixed with a large new pack of handcrafted locations for us to encounter. Another thing that we think would be useful is cutting down the distance between points of interest, or at least between where your ship lands and how far away they are, because sometimes they're almost 1,000 meters away, and unless the planet has particularly interesting biomes and aliens, it can feel a bit too far sometimes. There's many players asking for BGS to implement a vehicle because of this. However, I do understand Todd's intention to have this kind of lone explorer vibe, and for the feel of the game not to be this thing where you just to quickly zip around in a car between different locations. I also fully understand and enjoyed that zen feeling of the magnificent desolation while walking on a particularly beautiful moon or other barren planet. However, in the long run, for the people that actually want to keep playing Starfield over and over, the walk between your ship and a location can feel too lengthy. One conservative way to cut this down that I think is pretty reasonable is just chopping that distance by 25%. So if you land on a planet, a location that was 800 meters away is now 600 meters away. It's very easy to implement. Maybe you'd want a larger or smaller percentage, but overall it's just much easier than a vehicle and still enhances the exploration experience while leaving the vibes Bethesda was going for intact. Additionally, they could add a new boost pack option that is like the power pack but gives you a massive boost horizontally. It would be the perfect thing for exploring and also for launching yourself into the midst of battle. It gives me big Mass Effect Vanguard vibes. Again, this is also way easier to implement than land vehicles, as interesting as those might be. Another thing with exploration is choosing more interesting planets to be sent to for quests. While you 100% want cool stuff that isn't just put in front of everyone's face, I actually think Starfield has too much cool stuff that just isn't shown to players. I've seen the complaint many times that Starfield's planets don't feel sci-fi or alien enough, and that there's not many cool alien creatures and so on, and I just think this is just straight up not the case. However, I can see why some players feel this way because so many of the places with the cool stuff on them are not always places you get sent to for any quest reason. There are a large number of unique aliens and plenty of cool environments to find, but it seems like the more casual approach to Starfield doesn't have many players seeing enough. I've explored heaps in Starfield and I'm still finding new aliens. It's an area of the game that is surprisingly thorough. From flying pufferfish type aliens to invisible dinosaurs to what looks like a hairy hybrid between a fox and a bat. I've had plenty of movie moments coming out of my landing bay, seeing some alien species hunt down another one or engaging in what looks like a vicious territorial battle. There should just be more reasons or quests or things that happen to send you to see all of this. Sure, keep enough of this stuff hidden so that solo exploring for its own sake is still rewarding. However, there should probably be more around the areas you're sent to visit than there currently is. As a side request, I'd also really want there to be just names added for a lot of the mission board task characters. It feels a lot cooler to hunt down a pirate with a name versus another outlaw captain and so on. Another thing I would say fits into the topic of exploration is actually stealing ships, because ships coming and landing on planets is a cool random thing that happens when you're out exploring. I think that all limits should be removed. No limits. Zero inaccessible ships, period. BGS games have always been a go anywhere, do anything kind of thing, and I think that all ships should be stealable and enterable and flyable so long as you have the relevant piloting skill. Even if you need the security skill to get inside a bunch of them, fair enough. Another reason to get security is always a good thing, but it should never be inaccessible for no reason, particularly if it's because you haven't killed the enemies outside but you can't really see any outside, or there's enemies inside but you can't go in. There just shouldn't be a reason I can't go in the ship. I have a feeling this was done for some sort of balance reason, but honestly, stealing and selling ships doesn't even make you that much money anyway to get you to the point where it would be some crazy unfair advantage compared to other things that you can do in the game. It would still be cool for characters who want to do that to make money, but not OP by any means. Now, maybe there's even an automatic bounty thing you get as the ship detects that there's an unauthorized pilot on board or something like that. Some sort of drawback, but it's still overall worth it and fun, and there if you want to do it. And maybe you can bypass that bounty by hacking something before takeoff. Perhaps the deception skill could help with convincing people that your ship isn't stolen when you arrive to a new planet. Just let us into any ship, even if there's barriers to overcome and consequences for doing so. The cities of Starfield are the next thing that needs some enhancement. As a whole, I actually think many of the cities and settlements get less credit than they deserve. There's definitely plenty of cool areas and locations and vibes all around the place that people don't explore extensively, even places like Gagarin that have some cool quests for you to do. Also, once you end up getting a better boost pack and invest in the boost pack training skill, and you're kind of running around places like New Atlantis without using the metro system, climbing on top of things and so on, it just feels much cooler and much more like a Bethesda game. That said, the main cities and smaller settlements still could have been better, particularly when it comes to immersion. The obvious one here that everyone noticed is the NPCs. There's too many of them that have odd animations and hairstyles that don't seem to match and stay in the same places, and they have these overly intense eyes, and everyone knows the issue with NPCs. The NPCs that you actually interact with for quests, or the guards, shopkeepers, and other characters separate from the general citizenry, actually look pretty good. And as much as it didn't bother me that much and I could look past it, the generic citizens themselves definitely need some work. We want a much larger assortment of better looking NPCs added into the mix. And I'm not asking for supermodels here, just NPCs that look as real as shopkeepers do. Better outfits should be used as well, and they need to fit the environment, such as way more cowboy hats featuring in Aquila City and so on. And they have already done this to an extent, however I do just think that they could be doing a better job. Cities would also benefit massively from a small effort put into random encounters that support the lore of various areas. So if I'm told there's crime in the stretch and I should be careful there, maybe one night I see a thief rob someone and run off, and you can help the guards take them down. Perhaps one time on Neon I go to Ebside and get approached by a Disciples gang member who asks me to hand over 500 credits or he'll take it the hard way. Have people out the front of bars who had too much liquor and have a brawl breaking out maybe. You get the idea, this stuff's not too hard to add. There's plenty of random encounters in space, just put a bunch more into the cities. As far as vendors go, they should stock more ammo for certain ammo types, and I think generally they should have more credits for you to sell your loot. I understand not wanting to give each vendor too many credits, but at times it feels like they carry too little. And as I said earlier, perhaps this could be remedied via a rank of the commerce skill, giving an advantage to commerce players who want to sell lots of things and make a bunch of money. Also, there should be staple inventories that make sense for vendors to always have, and then a randomized rotating one on top. For example, the general store in Aquila can stock a cowboy hat, but as I found out when making the Aquila video, only sometimes. In my opinion, there should always be one there. Speaking of NPCs in cities, way less of them should be essential characters. I will say, I'm not one of those people who thinks that fail states for quests are some really cool epic thing. My preference is that if you mess something up, you get punished by the quest unraveling in a different way, instead of content simply ending. Basically, I think the punishment should be part of the story and not just an abrupt end. So if you stuff up, there's some serious disadvantage you have to face as you continue on and try and complete the quest successfully, even if that leads you to a less optimal outcome. That aside, far too many NPCs in Starfield just aren't killable, so if I want to stealthily take someone out playing some kind of evil pirate character, I should be able to do so without them getting downed and me getting a bounty. I understand that some NPCs should be fully essential, especially if there are more random encounters like we want, and if violence can come from those encounters, like in Skyrim, a dragon can just come and attack a town, and it wouldn't be cool if they just scorched a quest giver and you couldn't do that quest now, and every time you load back, the dragon's already kind of coming in and killing everyone. So I get it, but in some cases, NPCs should just be able to die, particularly if you've finished the quest they're involved in, or if their quest isn't part of, say, a main faction or the main story or something like that. Maybe in those cases, just have the quest be failed, tell me it's failed, and I can load back then if I want to, if there's no other person I can talk to begin that quest. Though I will say that in Starfield particularly, it's a pretty good game to just be able to kill anyone, so long as they're not related to completing the main story, because a new game plus mode could just be used to go through, and in this new iteration of the universe, you didn't slaughter all of the freestyle rangers. Adding new NPCs in updates who give new quests would also be appreciated, as well as just opening up new areas that were previously inaccessible. I noticed when fully exploring Aquila City to make a video on all the cool things you won't want to miss there, that there are some doors around that are blocked by trash bags, or there's these buildings under repair and so on, and having these opened up and filled with content would make things feel much denser. The fourth thing on this list is actually a huge boost of clarity when it comes to communicating various systems and stats to the the player. There's a reason that we've made so many videos about things I wish I knew earlier or tips that you need to know before you play, and that's because BGS didn't tell us a whole bunch of things about how the game works, and we had to figure it out ourselves. There can be, and there was a fun aspect to this, and I understand the whole angle of discovering things for ourselves, particularly when it comes to pushing the limits or trying to see if we can do a certain thing, but there are still these areas where I don't think it's cool to figure out a certain thing ourselves, and it would have just been far more convenient if Bethesda provided more information. The crew skills I talked about in the skills section are a perfect example of this. If we knew exactly what benefit we'd get from someone having piloting 3 over piloting 2, which in that case is giving you an extra power slot by adding an extra default one to engines, it just makes assessing choices more straightforward. When that little badge for the skill pops up next to the person, it would be good if there was a little description written under it. Starfield just needs to improve communication. There's no reason that the rejuvenation skill, for example, instead of saying slowly regenerate health outside of combat, can't be regenerates X percentage of max health per second outside of combat. And it's weird because many skills do give you a direct percentage, and then others just decide to obscure it, and this just isn't needed, especially when a game like Starfield is very fundamentally different to previous BGS games in several ways, and has many game systems which are super fun, like shipbuilding, but can seem overwhelming to new players, so I just think clarity's always welcome. I've sat there listening to heaps of unfair critique for the game, thinking that's wrong, that's not true, and no, that's not how that works, and so on, but really, if so many people are misunderstanding something, it means that the communication isn't up to scratch. Small things like being able to access your ship's cargo within 250 meters should be known, or how fast traveling can be made much simpler if you just use the map to go back to your ship instead of running 900 meters from a point of interest, or how you can just go to a planet and travel directly to a zone that you've been to before from the menu, and you don't have to actually jump in space above that planet first. People just need to know all this stuff. Now, traits are another example where having stats explained would be better. If I'm going to pick terra firma to have health and oxygen increased on the surface but decreased in space, it would be cool to know by how much. Particularly when this is a fundamental character choice that I can't swap out later, only remove it, and perhaps if the percentage I'm told up front makes me think that the magnitude doesn't seem worth it for my specific playthrough, then I would have picked something with more role-playing flavor like one of the religious or faction options. Same goes for mods. A description for an armor mod might say that it increases melee damage, and I think, well, it's worth investing hard into science to get that because I don't do enough melee damage, but then I find it's only a 10% boost, and I think, well, that wasn't worth it, I wish I didn't do that. Certain things revolving around crime would also be useful to know. Will I be reported if I clear all the enemies in this area and the last witness is removed? Sometimes in space it seems like that works and it says the last witness removed, but sometimes it's not the case. Is that because there was some signal sent out about what happened because I was too slow to take them all out? I'm still not sure. Even clarity when it comes to shipbuilding would help a lot of people out. Sure, once you've played with it for as long as we have, then you learn many of the interiors off by heart, but it would be a lot easier if we could see more of the interior layouts from the shipbuilding menu, whether that's full-on previews that you can look around with a flying camera to see exactly what a certain hab is like, or you're just rotating it while the exterior is transparent, or maybe there's merely better explanations written of the utility of each hab and everything within it, in addition to icons showing us where ladders and stairs are positioned inside. A little extra thing I'd just love for ships would be color scheme choices for the interiors, even if it was just picking between 3 set options, so if you make a jet black ship, you could pick a very dark paint option inside. So we'd just love some more clarity. The fifth thing on this list is actually providing some more morally dubious characters to be companions. There are such options already in Starfield, but I'm talking about core characters who are romanceable and dynamically get involved in conversations like the 4 main ones from Constellation do. These 4 are very interactable throughout the main quest, during factions and side quests. However, making all 4 of the fleshed out romanceable companions morally good was not the right move. Samco, Sarah, Barrett, and Andreja are decent companions, particularly when you get to know them more and get into their quests. I particularly like Andreja's backstory. She's also slightly more on board with slightly less moral behavior, but not if you cross certain lines that are easy to cross while playing a morally grey build. I'm not even asking for some Cicero type evil maniac here, even just a as long as the money's good type of bounty hunter would be great. Just someone who's gonna be down to do whatever it takes for their own gain. And look, you could totally add in some murderous violent mercenary who enjoys just being bad as well. I would just really love to see a fleshed out companion or multiple of them who you can bring with you throughout the game who will relish in the evil options and have plenty of things to say in multiple situations. Because the evil quest options are out there. There's plenty of times when you can do a complete scumbag move, whether that's to please certain people, get more credits, or just for your own satisfaction. You can roleplay with all kinds of morality in Starfield and have a great time. However, unless you're morally good on the whole, then the current main companions aren't going to be fun to bring along for an evil adventure. I've covered the 5 main things here, but there are some other areas I'd love to see improvement in, so I thought I'd just list them off. I think character customization could be improved in general. If we're just looking at the easiest fixes, I'd say that being able to add traits where it makes sense would be great. We can remove every trait in the game, and I'll put a video in the description that shows you how. So why not be able to add some? If I want to become convinced by the Varun prisoner of their faith, perhaps I can choose to start believing and have dialogue reflecting that, or go and get a mortgage from Galbank for the Dream Home trait, or undergo an alien DNA experiment. In Fallout 4 there's face tattoos but no body tattoos. Same in Starfield, and same goes for scars. If we can customize so much of our face and the size of our body, why not have tattoos and scars for the body? I feel like it's rare for people in real life to have tattoos on their face and nowhere else, and modders implement stuff like this all the time. All these aesthetic options matter. It's the reason why shipbuilding is so fun, even though so much of it just comes down to different aesthetic choices. Outposts could also have more added to them in terms of customization and building options, and a little fix for New Game Plus. I would say that given how long it takes to go through it multiple times, that there should be a higher chance of getting unique instances when you go to the lodge. Scott did it 10 times and only got like 2 of them. Maybe every second New Game Plus experience should have a unique instance, and the artifact locations should change up every time. Please do send this video to Bethesda and share it as much as you can on socials so there's the biggest chance possible that these fixes are implemented. Thank you so much for all of your support. We appreciate all of your kind messages and feedback, and we're super grateful to be able to have an audience who has enjoyed Starfield as much as we have, yet is able to talk about the flaws and put forward ideas on how to fix them and keep adding new things to truly make Starfield a game people can play for a generation. Socials are in the description, so you can show me your favorite planet you've explored on Twitter. My name is Michael, and I look forward to nerding out with you again very soon.